Have you noticed something really strange? This is the so-called hurricane belt, and Jamaica is right in the center of it. However, Jamaica doesn't get hit by hurricanes as often as other countries nearby. In fact, hurricanes often head for Jamaica, and at the last moment they turn away or go around, like recently Hurricane Matthew did in 2016. Some people suggest it's because of Blue Mountains. If it's true, why not all hurricanes get diverted then? In 1988, the eye of Hurricane Gilbert went straight through Jamaica. So what determines the path of a hurricane? Can we, as humans, change it? Why not stop hurricanes with modern technology? Just kill them before they reach any land. Did you know that US government actually tried that? But what happened? To mark the end of this hurricane season, the answers to these questions and much more in this episode, the full story of hurricanes.
The Category 5 storm exploded into a monster overnight.
To a monster Category 5 storm.
A 400-mile wide storm moving up the coast of Florida.
Virtually no home has been undamaged. Infrastructure has been ripped apart.
Okay, wait. I'm sure you studied hurricanes at geography lessons, but this is how most people know about them, from news and documentaries, where hurricanes are portrayed as these evil forces. We tend to see them as something bad because we look at them from our human perspective, completely ignoring a much bigger picture, which is the Earth. There is global atmospheric circulation on our planet. It is the most important part of our ecosystem, and hurricanes are just some of its tools. The result of global circulation is redistribution of heat from the equator to cooler areas of our planet. If we didn't have this, the equator would have become too hot and the poles too cold, making all of these locations uninhabitable. Basically, one of the reasons the Caribbean Sea is not a boiling soup is because of hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, and all the other things we tend to call disasters. The planet gives us a choice. Humans in tropical areas either learn to live with hurricanes or they won't be able to live there at all. Let's look at hurricanes. The scientific name for a hurricane is a tropical cyclone, and as the name suggests, it's a type of a storm that only forms in tropical or subtropical areas, but never on the equator, as you will see later why. The word hurricane is of Jamaican origin. Literally, it's a Jamaican word. It was given by people who we now call Taino, who lived in Jamaica prior to any Europeans. The word originally sounds something like huracán, the storm center. When the Spanish came, they borrowed this word from the locals, and this is how it came to other European languages, including English. This is the reason why cyclones are called typhoons in the Pacific. The local people there had their own name for this weather phenomenon. There was no known local name in the Indian Ocean, so there we just keep the name cyclones. Hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones are the same things, and the difference in name is just the result of history and culture. Tropical cyclones are classified into categories based on maximum sustained wind speeds. If the wind is 38 miles per hour or less, this is called tropical depression. The next stage is a tropical storm, and only when wind speeds reach 74 miles per hour, the cyclone is classified as Category 1 hurricane. Major hurricanes fall into categories 3, 4, and 5. This scale is known as Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale, that was developed in 1971 by civil engineer Herbert Saffir and meteorologist Robert Simpson. Hurricanes are also measured by air pressure. The lower the pressure, the more powerful the cyclone is, and usually the faster the winds. The most powerful Atlantic hurricane known to humanity was Hurricane Wilma in 2005, though the largest and most intense tropical cyclone ever recorded to this date is still Typhoon Tip because of its lowest air pressure, and it keeps the record from 1979. The size of cyclones can vary significantly. Here is the image to illustrate the gigantic typhoon tip in comparison to the size of the United States. And here is the size of the smallest cyclone ever recorded, Tropical Storm Marco. All tropical cyclones are given human names, but this has not always been the case. The name system was introduced in 1953, and since then tropical storms are named in accordance with the list generated by the National Hurricane Center. The lists for each location are used in rotation and then recycled. For example, the 2021 for Atlantic will be used again in 2027. That's why we have hurricanes with the same name in different years. The only time that there is a change in the list is if a storm is deadly or costly, so its name gets retired. To understand how hurricanes work and where they come from, we shall use this: the wind. I've just created high air pressure inside, and around me is low air pressure relative to this system. What we call as wind is simply air moving from high air pressure area to low air pressure area, like so. The air always does that, from the scale of our room to the scale of our planet. Except for the planet, we have something much better than this: the sun. At the equator, the air heats and rises to the height of about 11 miles and spreads out towards the poles, gradually cooling and sinking as it moves, before descending to the surface and flowing back to the equator. If the Earth did not rotate and was a simple landmass with no oceans, hotter air would rise at the equator and there would only be 2 air circulation cells, one in each hemisphere. But the unequal distribution of land and oceans and the speed of the Earth's rotation makes this circulation system more complicated, giving us a 3-cell pattern for each hemisphere. These cells are responsible for our weather, and they are the key to hurricane life cycle. Where air is rising, an area of low pressure is created. But this alone is not enough for a hurricane to be born. The other requirements have to be in place: a large, still, warm ocean area with surface temperature that exceeds 26.5 Celsius over an extended period. The size of the warm water area changes with the seasons. In the North Atlantic Ocean, September usually has the largest area of the warmest water, and it is not a coincidence that the Atlantic hurricane season occurs from the 1st of June to the 30th of November, with the peak of the season in September. But even when the temperature requirement is met, we also need enough moisture brought to the upper layers for clouds to form, which can potentially become very thick and heavy and support the thunderstorm activity. These clouds should not form too far from the equator because they need an access to their main source of fuel, warm water, but they shouldn't be too close to equator either, because in this case the cyclonic rotation would not be possible, and we need hurricanes to spin for their system to be self-sustainable. The reason why hurricanes spin and move in a certain manner has everything to do with the rotation of our planet. And again, best illustrated with an example of a smaller rotating system. Let's say there are 2 people spinning and our camera is hanging still from the ceiling. From the moment a man throws a ball, it is just going straight. But look at what happens when the camera rotates together with the man. The path of the ball, from this perspective, looks completely different, as if the ball is curving. In science, this is known as Coriolis effect. This is what happens when objects moving straight appear to curve in a rotating system. And yes, you can see this effect just like so. The Coriolis effect on our planet lies in the fact that the Earth's surface rotates faster at the equator than at the poles, simply because the Earth is wider at the equator, so has further to travel in one day. If we were to throw a ball from the equator towards the North Pole, even though it moves in a straight line, the ball will appear to an observer on the ground to curve away, as the point near the North Pole is moving more slowly. Remember the air circulation cells. Pay attention to the bottom of these cells. Surface air here goes south towards the equator, while here it goes north. However, because of Coriolis effect, the air from these cells gets deflected towards the west, forming trade winds that we can observe in the Caribbean, while here it deflects east, leading to the prevailing southwesterly winds often experienced over the UK. This deflection is also a major factor in explaining why in northern hemisphere winds blow anti-clockwise around low pressure area and clockwise around high pressure area. With low pressure systems, the air gets sucked in, but is deflected because of Coriolis effect, while with high pressure systems, the air moves away from them, but again gets deflected, resulting in a clockwise spin. This very same effect is the opposite in southern hemisphere. All cyclones are low-pressure systems. That's why in northern hemisphere, hurricanes always spin anti-clockwise, and in southern hemisphere, cyclones spin clockwise. The greater the difference in air pressure, the faster the air will move from high air pressure to low air pressure areas, hence resulting in faster wind speeds. This is how hurricanes form and why they spin. There are people in the 21st century who believe that our planet is a flat disk that looks like this. They claim that the sun is moving around the central part of the disk and causes ripple effect, which they suggest is the reason for weather. But if this was true, there wouldn't be any hurricanes, because the ripple effect doesn't make things spin. And if a planet was a flat disk that was rotating, then all storms and clouds would be moving towards the edges of this disk, which doesn't correspond to the reality. So, unfortunately, for people who support flat Earth theory, the existence of tropical cyclones and the way they spin and move accidentally proves that our planet happens to be a globe. But if you support the flat Earth theory, please let us know in the comment section below how you explain hurricanes. Now let's get back to Jamaica. The earliest reference to hurricane in Jamaica dates back to 1519 from the Spanish, when men on the ship near Jamaica survived what they called minor hurricane. But why should we care what was happening with hurricanes so many years ago? This is because tropical cyclones can change history. For example, in 1281, a massive typhoon wiped out the fleet of Mongol Empire, putting an end to their attempts at invading Japan. In recent years, the 1970 Bola cyclone is directly linked to the creation of an independent country we know today as Bangladesh. In Jamaica, weather played an important role as well. Think about it. Hurricanes usually have the worst effect on agriculture. They destroy a lot of crops, and it takes a while for them to recover. So back in the day, when the whole island was full of sugarcane plantation, there were no weather warnings, so tropical storms and hurricanes should have damaged and destroyed all of those plantations on regular basis with winds and floods. And they didn't. The economically booming years until 1780 in Jamaica also coincided with the period of very low hurricane activity. We know all that from the records of weather observations kept by English slave owners. If only the weather was different in the 18th century, Jamaica might have never become the center of sugarcane production. This is just to illustrate how hurricanes, as well as the lack of hurricanes, can change our history. But what about modern-day history? Jamaica became independent in 1962, and since then it was directly hit by one major hurricane so far. It was Hurricane Gilbert. Not only it was a major hurricane in Jamaica, it was called the storm of the century, because at that time it was the most powerful hurricane recorded in history of humanity. The record that was broken by Hurricane Wilma 17 years later. Gilbert blew off 80% of the roofs of the nation's 500,000 houses, 1/5 of which could not be repaired. But the worst was to follow. Days and weeks without water in some areas and months without electricity in others. Gilbert wrecked Jamaica economically, and a lot of parts of the island were flattened out. But here is something people rarely talk about. After Gilbert, more people focused on building houses made of concrete and steel to make them hurricane-proof, which hadn't been the case before 1988, when quite a number of homes were made of plywood and zinc roofs. So if you haven't visited Jamaica since before Gilbert, you'd be surprised how much Jamaica housing and infrastructure changed since then. In total, from the year of independence, there were 12 hurricanes, including Gilbert, that caused from minor to major damage in Jamaica, and in some cases, loss of lives. 12 is more than the number of hurricanes in 18th century Jamaica, but this is less than what other countries nearby had to experience. The total number of hurricanes during those years was 377, which means only 3.18% of hurricanes had some sort of an impact on Jamaica. During the same time period, the United States was hit by 92 hurricanes. Cuba had 28, Haiti 23, and Dominican Republic 31. You see, there were many times when a hurricane was seemingly on its way to Jamaica, but would change its course at the last moment. Here is Hurricane Clea. It was heading for Jamaica, but then turned north. Look at Hurricane Beulah. Again, it was heading for Jamaica, but this time got diverted south, went around the island and then back on its original path. Hurricane Ivan tried to do the same, by the way, but was too close, so it ended up causing damage. Hurricane Matthew shifted east to go around the island, similar to what Hurricane Thomas did a few years earlier. This resulted in certain speculations that usually hurricanes try to avoid Jamaica. People would attribute it to prayers being answered, the island being blessed, or what appeared to be more scientific reasons like Blue Mountains on the eastern end of the island deflecting hurricane away before it arrived. I decided to check all this information because, after all, it is well known what determines the path of a hurricane. Let's have a look. The movement of a hurricane from one location to another is called hurricane propagation. If a hurricane was just moving over water as a self-sustaining system without any extra influence, the path would have been relatively easy to predict. It would be the path of the wind field surrounding the hurricane, and the faster the wind, the faster the hurricane propagation. This is because initially all hurricanes are steered by global winds. But when the hurricane is moving, it encounters all the other wind systems that are also moving things in their own right. For example, clockwise rotation of high-pressure systems often cause hurricanes to stray from their initial east-to-west movement and curve northward. One such high-pressure system is a subtropical ridge. Hurricanes generally propagate around that high-pressure system, and depending on where exactly that system is located at that particular moment would determine if the hurricane turns north before reaching the Caribbean or not. This would have been the end of story, if not for all the other combination of factors. A hurricane can drift northwest due to the process called beta drift, which occurs because of the effect of Coriolis force on different parts of the hurricane. It's way beyond the scope of this video to explain it, but the point is, the wind in the eastern part of the hurricane starts moving in the opposite direction to the rest of the hurricane. As a result, this influences the wind field around the hurricane. The larger the hurricane is, the more it modifies the wind around it, and as the wind changes direction, the hurricane track changes. The global winds and the beta drift are the most important factors determining where hurricanes are going to go. But they're not the only ones. Hurricanes grow and intensify when there are warm and wet conditions. In the tropical oceans, the sea surface temperature is much warmer than that of the deeper water below the surface. When a hurricane moves slower, it has more time to intensify by feeding on that warm surface water. But as this water gets eaten up by a hurricane, it has to be replaced with something. And that something is water from the lower layer. The process is known as upwelling. This is when the layer of cold water gets to the surface. But remember, hurricanes need their fuel, which is warm water. So when the water gets cold, the hurricanes shift to where the water is warmer. This is what happened to Hurricane Matthew in 2016. It slowed down and ate up all the surface water and then slightly shifted to the east because that's where more warm water to be found. So yeah, it moved right, not because Jamaica scared it away or because of Blue Mountains. In that particular case, it happened because of upwelling. Generally, if we want to kill a hurricane, all we need to do is to feed it with cool air or dry air. And this is what happens when hurricane makes landfall, especially when there is a large mountainous terrain. There is a lot of friction going on, and the air above the land is cooler and drier than over the sea. So basically the cyclone no longer has warm and wet conditions to feed on and becomes weaker. So yes, land and especially mountains have a lot of influence on hurricanes. They can disrupt its system and change their track. Here's a picture of Hurricane Katrina before it made landfall and when it was making a landfall. But can there be any influence by mountains on hurricane as it is approaching before any landfall? Yes, hurricanes can get diverted by what's known as vertical wind shear. Vertical wind shear is the change in wind speed or direction with the change in altitude. Because of the way cyclones are usually portrayed, the view from the top, it's easy to forget that a hurricane is not a flat circular cloud floating over us. It's more like a big fat cylinder, 8 miles tall. The coastline, especially the mountainous one, would often have atmospheric fronts or strong vertical wind shear going towards the hurricane. Once it interacts, and obviously it happens prior to landfall, it brings cool and dry air into different parts of the system, and the hurricane can get tilted. This in turn makes it weaker or can steer it away from the land where the wind shear is coming from. Some hurricanes are more prone to wind shear than others. This is what happened to Hurricane Beulah in 1967. It was affected by strong wind shear associated with the jet stream, which rapidly weakened the hurricane and kept pushing it south until the shear abated and the storm resumed its track. But what about mountains when it comes to Jamaica? Can they divert a hurricane away from the island? Yes, but they're not Blue Mountains. They're called La Cordillera Central and La Sierra de Bauruco in Dominican Republic, and Massif de la Haute and Massif de la Sey in Haiti. This is because when a hurricane approaches Jamaica from the east, the northern part of their hurricane already starts making landfall in Hispaniola, where there are a lot of mountains, which in turn can weaken, slow down, or divert a hurricane. So, Blue Mountains, do they have an influence on hurricanes as well? Yes, when the hurricane goes over them, but before it reaches them, no. Look at the size of hurricane. Hurricane Gilbert was 60 times the size of Jamaica. If there was any vertical wind shear coming from Blue Mountains, the influence on Hurricane Gilbert would have been an equivalent of me trying to blow away Boeing 747 approaching my face at full speed. Not going to work. With Gilbert, even the interaction with Dominican Republic and Haiti didn't help, partially because it was too big, moving too fast, and there was one more thing happening with Gilbert. Hurricanes often undergo eyewall replacement cycles. This is what it looks like. This process can magnify the impact if landfall occurs during the intensification part of the cycle. This is exactly what happened when Hurricane Gilbert made landfall in Jamaica. It approached as Category 3 hurricane, but instead of getting weaker as it passed through the land of Jamaica, it grew stronger and left as Category 5 hurricane. The size of a hurricane is also the reason why we cannot really stop them, even with all the modern technology we have. From 1962, US government supported a research into methods of hurricane modification known as Project Storm Fury. To kill a hurricane, all we need to do is to deprive it from its fuel, which is warm water. There were several ideas how this can be done, from things like seeding clouds with dry ice or chemicals, throwing icebergs under the hurricane to cool the ocean, to some extreme things like blowing up hurricanes with hydrogen bombs or blowing hurricanes away from land with giant fans. Anyway, they tried one of the methods on 4 different hurricanes, these ones. They seeded clouds with silver iodide in an attempt to artificially stimulate the convection outside of the eye wall, which should have produced a decrease in strongest winds and caused the hurricane to weaken. The experiment took place over the Atlantic, far from land, and it had no effect. The project Storm Fury was closed in 1983. As carefully reasoned as some of those ideas were, they all shared the same problem. They failed to appreciate the size and power of tropical cyclones. They're just too big, fueled by the star, and influenced by the rotation of our planet. We simply don't have the technology yet, and even if we did, it's unclear if it would be safe to use it. I'm sure you've seen news where scientists offer several options about possible path of the hurricane. But if we know how hurricanes work and what determines their path, why don't they just give one option? And this is because there are hundreds of variables taken into account, from air, land, and water. And if only one of them changes a little bit, it will have a domino effect on the whole system and bring completely different results.
The station to the left is our dropson operator. They're listening for me to call when to release a dropson or a buoy. Once they're released, a little parachute is connected to it. It goes up out into the air to keep the dropson stable as it falls through the atmosphere, collecting wind speed and wind direction and fall rate all the way down until it hits the ocean surface. We have a person from the Hurricane Research Division sitting here and processing those dropsons that fall into the water. They gather the data, process it, package it up, and send it off the airplane. They use that information to make their official Hurricane Center forecast, which is what all the news stations and everyone grabs to find out what's going on with the storm.
It's still true that statistically there are less hurricanes that affect Jamaica than other countries nearby. Why? Jamaica gets hit less just because of its size and its geographical location. Obviously, US would have more hurricanes because it's huge, and no matter the track hurricanes take, in most cases they will end up in the US. Or Mexico. Dominican Republic gets hit slightly more than Haiti simply because it's the first big piece of land to the east and hence more likely to encounter a hurricane. The geographical location of Jamaica makes the island protected from the east by Dominican Republic and Haiti, and it is protected from the north by Cuba. So hurricanes that can do a lot of damage in Jamaica should be coming from either southeast or from the west, which also happens, but not as often. This is a picture of Hurricane Elsa in 2021, which was going over Jamaica. If I saw that picture in the news without actually living in Jamaica, I would have thought, roofs blown away, massive destruction. But now look at this picture. The red is the dangerous part. The area around it is just thunderstorms, and the blue is potential for rain. So even though some parts of Jamaica had heavy rain, in Montego Bay we barely had anything. And there was no strong wind anywhere either. And this is the last point I'd like to make, and probably the most important one. When it is reported that the storm is damaging everything in Jamaica, people in Jamaica look around and nothing is happening. Of course they understand that the media is blowing things out of the proportion. But then what? If somebody cries woof many times and nothing happens, when the real woof comes, people might not take it seriously and won't be prepared. This partially explains why there were fatalities during Gilbert, even though people had all the warnings and they knew it was coming. Some simply underestimated the danger, thinking it was not going to hit them. They thought maybe the island was just blessed. Well, let's have a look. Hurricane Gustav was going for Cuba, then shifted to hit Jamaica. Same for Hurricane Gordon, that was heading straight and then shifted east towards Jamaica as well. Hurricane Charlie in Gilbert went straight through. Sandy went from south to north without getting diverted. Hurricane Dean came very close from the south and did a lot of damage. In fact, if you check the statistics for all hurricanes, you will see that hurricanes shift away from Jamaica as often as they shift towards Jamaica. But there is no reason to panic about it. The goal of this video is to help people understand how hurricanes work and that we should not be afraid of them. Hurricanes are not earthquakes. We know when they are coming at least a week in advance and have plenty of time to prepare. We also have much better housing and infrastructure in Jamaica compared to previous years. And as long as we don't underestimate tropical cyclones, no lives should ever be lost to a hurricane. Some of you might have noticed that there haven't been any videos on my channel for 3 weeks. And the reason, I was working on this documentary. I really want to do something simpler, but I believe these complex documentaries are also very important. And if you agree, please share this video with somebody you think might also benefit from it. I would like to thank everyone, and especially the patrons. They voted for this topic to be published first, and it's also their support that helps me to keep making these documentaries no matter how complex they are. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, vote on topics on this channel, and check out some behind-the-scenes videos, you can join our team from only $5 per month. Thanks to everyone for watching. My name is Irina, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.